Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for attending the Respond and Protect Expert Advice Against Online Hate at the Online Harassment Summit at South by Southwest. We'd like to express our gratitude to South by Southwest for being strong enough, brave enough to host this event. South by Southwest is committed to creating an enjoyable and memorable experience for all its attendees and speakers. To help create an environment, we kindly ask that all participants of the Online Harassment Summit act responsibly and treat each other with respect, empathy, and compassion. South by Southwest reserves the right to revoke South by Southwest entry credentials from anyone, any participant whose conduct is deemed by South by Southwest or APD to be inappropriate, disorderly, or offensive. Lastly, personal items are prohibited from being left unattended for any reason. Please do not save seats with personal items. Any items left unattended will be confiscated and destroyed by APD, no exceptions. Thank you very much. I am Jonathan Vick. I am the Assistant Director of Cyberhate Response for the Anti-Defamation League, and I'll be the moderator for this event. To my right is Alon Bar David, 28 years old, lives in Israel, co-founder of The Red Button. The Red Button is a social impact startup that provides a unique technological anti-cyberbullying platform and is considered one of the largest organizations in Israel leading the fight against cyberbullying with more than 3,000 users. Anybody looking for more information on his product, he will be available afterwards to demonstrate and discuss it. Further, on the right, is Jonathan Godfrey, is the Vice President of Public Affairs at ACT, the Application Association, an organization representing more than 5,000 app companies in the mobile ecosystem. Jonathan identifies and drives communication strategy educating the press, public, and policymakers about the app marketplace. He is a strong advocate against government overreach and has led campaigns in support of encryption, data security, and modernizing health privacy. Jonathan also authors the annual State of the App Economy Report. I'd like to open by saying that we are our objective here is to discuss the response mechanisms, the exposure, and the implications in some cases of inadvertent or deliberate issues pertaining to activity online. I'd like to take this opportunity to say that part of my position is that the internet is not an information superhighway. It is not that orderly. It is an information ocean with tides and swells and storms and obstacles below the surface and unforeseen objects coming from all directions. Despite all of these shortcomings, it is our ultimate source of food for our minds and hearts. As Assistant Director of Cyberhate Response to the Anti-Defamation League, I have been privileged to work with them for 13 years, fighting online hate. We are members of the Anti-Cyberhate Working Group, where we have facilitated a joining of industry organizations for the past 6 years, having built out the best practices for combating cyber hate online, an anti-cyber hate response mechanism online, coalitions in Europe, and working on coalitions elsewhere in South America and in various other markets. We are privileged to be in this space, and I thank you very much. We are going to talk today about the sequence of events and as we have moved along in our discussions for what we're doing here today, we have touched upon the ideas of harassment and response and issues that, including reporting and the attendant problems that have come up with that. We're going to start with harassment. We're going to give it to Jonathan to start off in the harassment environment and how about vulnerability and leakage of information.
Thanks, Jonathan. So it's the 30th anniversary of South by Southwest this year. Since 2007, South by Southwest Interactive has been one of the most influential conferences in its kind in the mobile economy. If you remember, that year saw the introduction of the iPhone and the explosive emergence of Twitter that came out of South by Southwest right here. So you don't need me to tell you that smartphones are one of the fastest adopted technologies that we've ever encountered. It's the fastest in human history. No other technology has been embraced by humans ever before. That's not electricity, it's not the computer, it's not the internet. We all use our smartphones and we all communicate and store very valuable and information there. It's what we expect having smartphones. Consumers expect to be able to access information no matter where they are, and they expect to be able to share, and it's also a way that we keep in touch and how we communicate. Apps in the mobile economy bring people together, and it's grown immensely. The app industry has grown immensely in just the 8 years that it's been that it's existed. It's now a $120 billion industry. I should set at the outset a note of thanks for South by Southwest for hosting this summit and covering what is an important issue and devoting so much attention and time and space to it. So we're going to talk about harassment and where that happens, and let's talk about online, the things that you can do, right, or things in places where it happens, right. First and foremost, you should be careful about the information that you post online. You should limit the access and posting of contact information that you have. You should limit that just to trusted persons. Keep in mind when harassment happens often where people can find information about a person online and use that to follow them or find them or troll them in a public place or in a public forum and finding information that could be embarrassing or otherwise. So with that in mind, be sure to think about your personal presence online. Think about the photos that you have on social platforms. Do you allow anybody to tag them, or do you control that, or who can see them? That's pretty critical. Keep in mind also location information on your phone. That's shared within a lot of other different apps. So you have control over that and how that's collected and shared through the settings on your phone as well. And there are a lot of other apps and programs that you can use that help you take control of how much information you put out there and how you communicate in a secure environment. Encryption, as Jonathan mentioned, is one of the things that we work with a lot at the App Association. It's a critical part to being able to communicate safely and store very critical information like health data or education and kids data in a place that's safe from people who shouldn't have it. So when you're thinking about encrypted communications, think about how you communicate through messaging platforms, through messaging apps, how you store information remotely in the cloud. There are many platforms that allow you to do that in an encrypted way. Think about how you store your passwords even. 1Password is a really good app that you can use that helps you do that. And think also about when you're communicating about sensitive information in particular, there are VPNs, virtual private networks, that you can use to make sure that those communications stay private.
Okay, Jonathan, what about advances in encryption for personal data? Have the companies you work with been moving that forward as well?
Well, sure, yeah. I mean, encryption is really important for sensitive information, right? We have one of our companies is not too far from here in San Antonio, Texas. One of our member companies. It's called Airstrip, and they provide health data, medical data. They provide a platform for the doctors and physicians to share this information. So one of the most critical places that we're seeing this in effect is in an ambulance, right? So an EMT technician can send live EKGs, right, live waveform data from the ambulance to the hospital, to the emergency room where they're taking a patient, right? So imagine if you're a cardiac patient and that information gets to the emergency room before the patient does. That means they can set up a cath lab in anticipation of the arrival of this patient. And keep in mind, those minutes and seconds that are saved by relaying that information along the way can mean the difference in a person's life or death, or the quality of life you have after a cardiac incident. But the only way they're able to do this is by safeguarding that information to the greatest extent possible. They started out using DIACAP, right, a Department of Defense level encryption, so they could protect this very sensitive and critical data. If they didn't encrypt this information, they would not be able to work with hospitals and hospital systems, because health data is one of those sensitive and critical things that we believe shouldn't be in anybody else's hands but those intended. And so safeguarding that data, I think Airstrip has shown a path forward and why there is a marketplace for that kind of both the protection of your data, but the encryption that allows that technology to benefit people in ways that can save lives.
Now, we all know that assuming that the password protection somebody set up, the information they posted online is somehow tragically revealing or drastically revealing, then they are put in a position where they need to cope with what has transpired as a result of this information becoming public in some way, shape, or form. Alon, what are your thoughts on people coping with once they've reached the problem?
So, first of all, hi everyone, and thanks for South by that having this important conference and inviting us to join and speak. I would split it into two. First of all, is before it's done. I call that step prevent, and the second step, the second thing is after it's done, when it's damage control. When it comes to prevent, I would suggest that we focus on education and awareness. It seems that values in the virtual world, in the virtual environment, are a bit different from the real world. And it seems that when it comes to the online environment, people used to ignore it because we not need to feel the other side feelings. We not need to deal with it. The second thing is that the awareness of the consequences. If you can upload, please, the second slide. It seems that, especially when it comes to teenagers, they do not understand the meaning of the online actions. And when I'm saying online action, that means even to do a like or to do a comment or to do a post. And the consequence can be very extremely. And I will show you in a minute one of the reports that we're receiving to the red button, and to show what is the consequence of such as event like harassment. And I think if we educate and bring awareness, if you can please move to the second slide. Yeah, thanks. And this is example of a child who committed suicide after he got harassment online, of course. And I think we should all be aware of the consequence of the online of our online actions. The last thing about the prevent is that users are very quickly on the trigger. We should know that today it could be me, and tomorrow it could be my friend, and tomorrow it could be me. And like no one is really protected today. And if you can bring the third slide, you can see here a boycott hate group of 22 members that join into one group against a child. And again, I think my suggestion here is to educate and to bring awareness and be aware to the consequence of of those actions. The second step that I mentioned is after it's done. What can we do in order to minimize the damage? So usually, in my experience, we should wait until the storm will pass by. When it comes to online harassment, in my experience, we saw that it's happened. It takes 5 days until it calms down, and we suggest and we recommend to users to be calm and not do nothing. It's like when someone bully passing in the street, and you know that he is looking for trouble, so you know that you should do not do nothing right now, and to wait until it will pass. The second thing is, of course, report. There is each one of the social networks have tools to report, to flag. YouTube, Facebook, all Instagram, Twitter, they all have a report tool. So this is the traditional method. Of course, there is organizations such as ADL and the Red Button, which established to close the gap between the users and the social media and the social hosts and the social networks. And for example, the Red Button is developed for empower the users themselves to report with an easy, user-friendly system. In some cases, we also need to involve the law enforcement, call the police and tell them about the case. Sometimes no one can do something better than the police. And the last thing is usually there is very thick line between slander and saying bad things about people and online harassment. So sometimes we need to use a good lawyer that expert in such in cases like slanders.
All right. Our experience also is sometimes based on having an understanding for the limitations and the realistic expectations when someone has been harassed and what to do in that situation. In many cases, the first response is a very visceral one by the person being subject to the harassment. The desire for them is to have the ultimate type of response that they're and want to make incredible demands on the actions that may be possible. It is critical that the person who's on the receiving end of the harassment try and step back from it and try and keep it in context. Not all harassment is equal. There are some harassment which falls into the realm of imminent threat. Some harassment or perceived harassment is simply the result of an offhanded remark, which is not the same as in the same barometer as somebody who is receiving a violent threat. All of these things need to be looked at and responded by the individual in a varying context. And it's important that, not to fly off the handle when it happens, to keep your cool, to understand where it's coming from and who's saying it and the impact it's having on the individual. But ultimately, the fact when somebody receives harassment online, the very fact that they're feeling harassed and they're feeling targeted and they're feeling victimized is indeed the critical element here. There are, however, limits to what can be done. Very often, people will insist that whoever is harassing them be arrested immediately, be jailed immediately, be prosecuted in some way, and that's not always the case. there are limits to the law. Jonathan, I think, has some insight on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably one of the immediate things that somebody feels in one of those situations is how can I bring the law down on somebody who's harassing me and saying hateful things. And in our country, that's a really difficult thing to do, primarily because of the bedrock of our Constitution is the right to free speech. And all of us here are strong advocates and supporters of the Internet's role in providing an outlet for free speech. But we're also loath to suggest that government should be restricting access for online communities. You understand that the online communities, some of the online communities that we're talking here, can be some of the only outlets for those who feel isolated in their areas and can't connect with like-minded people. It's also the internet and the networks and the platforms that we use are also what allows those in coercive regimes worldwide to find an outlet and to communicate and organize in another way. That platform provides hope for communities in really difficult situations. And it's interesting that we're talking here about online hate, and just to demonstrate some of the limitations in our legal system. When the hate crimes legislation was finally passed not too long ago, before that there was a really fierce debate about whether that meant that preachers would be prosecuted from the pulpit for things that they said that might have been offensive to communities. And in order, and it was it was a battle that we had to fight to pass this legislation. But the core issue is that we can't restrict the free speech of people in this environment. That can't happen from a legal standpoint. You can't look to law enforcement authorities to punish people for what they're saying in these environments. Where that happens best, right? The best response to that, where the law can't step in, where law enforcement authorities can't step in, particularly in this country. The people who can and who do the most effective job about this are communities, are larger communities activating people that you have issues in common with, and respond in a way that puts pressure on platform. Basically, why we're here today is an outcome of that, right? So you all know the history of this. There was a couple panels last year that were meant to address some outcomes in issues, gender issues in an online area, and they canceled them because of a number of reasons, but for an outcry from one area of the online community. But so many people weighed in and expressed how disappointed they were with South by Southwest, that there was a response, right? There was a response to bring it back and show that these issues are important. That's why we have the summit here today. And it's communities that help sharpen and focus the message of individuals in a broader sense that can actually prevail on many of the companies that are providing these platforms. And clearly ADL was one of the leaders in making that happen here, but have been doing so since 1913 when the organization was founded, right, Jonathan?
Right. One of the most prevalent questions is, why isn't more being done? That belies the point that an incredible amount has been done. Where the individual companies, platforms, applications have in many cases done a tremendous amount of work to improve their services, to move the bar a little bit higher, to make everything more accessible, more user-friendly. And is it perfect? No, but we have evidence that where YouTube has taken down millions upon millions of videos the last year, Facebook, we recently cleaned out a large number of terrorists, and Twitter cleaned out a large number of terrorist accounts. We get emails on a regular basis about changes in the terms of service for almost every platform that we participate in. This is part of what more can be done. We are faced with certain quandaries, certain conflicts in the First Amendment in terms of our desire for the ultimate justice and the desire for an inviting environment, an open environment where we can go and express ourselves. We see many examples outside the United States where content is regulated heavily, and we have come to the conclusion in our country that that is not the route we want to go. As a result, we are faced with turning to our communities, being more proactive, having better coalitions, better discussions within our friends and colleagues, and using the mechanisms that are available. There is an increasing number of organizations that everybody who's at this conference, certainly at the online Harassment Summit, are working with in numbers that are unprecedented in the history of the internet. So what more can be done is dialogue. What more can be done is communication. What more can be done is collaboration. And that is really the most productive way to move forward. Legislation is the law. That means going to court. That means spending time. That is not always the most productive way to go, and in many cases can take an awful lot of time and burn up an awful lot of resources. In terms of, there are an evolving number of organizations, Red Button being one of them, that are looking towards technology as the solution to the problem. Alon, can you talk about that and some of your the experience that you've had with some of the other people you've spoken with?
Yeah, actually in the past few years, because of the increasing of the cyberbullying, the harassment online, many technology solution try to comes up with solution. One of them is Tarisha Parbao. If someone here in the room heard about her, it's a 15 years old teenager that made a rethink solution for cyberbullying. That if, for example, one of the users writes something bad, there is algorithm behind the scenes that analyzes the text and pop up if something bad written. There is many websites that giving the options to report through the website and send the links. There is many parental control that monitor activity online. ADL doing a great job, and of course this is why we also create the red button to allow users easy way to report. They can follow their report, they can write a comment, what you cannot do in the traditional channels, and that's it.
Oh, I think
Alon's being kind of modest here. If y'all haven't seen his app and you have an Android, you should check it out. You can. It's really impressive. You can have, for any of the social networks that you have, you can have a button that follows you. It's off to the side, right off the side of your screen. And if there's something that you read and you look at that's distasteful, that's harassment, you can just manually with your finger drag that to the offending statements and everything, and it automatically filters up to Red Button, who can then reach out to the platforms and share that and communicate with them in a way that's probably easier, in which they're better equipped to do maybe than somebody who's the target of harassment and maybe isn't as maybe as a rush of blood to the head and is angrier than they are thinking about how to best address this. Alon's app is really incredible, so if you haven't seen it, y'all should check it out.
Thank you. I must say that it's only exists in Israel right now, but soon we want to bring it as a worldwide solution to cyberbullying, because we saw that it's working during the past 3 years. Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah.
And some of the applications, some of the opportunities to use technology Alon's being one example. Another that many people in the room might be familiar with was code developed during the Gamergate, the height of the Gamergate problem and the abuse that was being received by certain people on Twitter and other places, was called GG Blocker, which was an application that looked at the people who were the harassers and the people associated with them and allowed the person to create a blocking list based on the people who are harassing them and the other members of the group. So that is a very grassroots sort of solution up to corporate solutions. So the opportunities are tremendous. It is really a matter of the opportunities. Many of the companies, many of the large companies are running hackathons with the direct intent to generate through universities and high schools and the brightest, youngest minds innovative solutions for these problems. And these hackathons are incredibly well attended, are very energetic, and have had tremendous outcomes. And some of them have made their way into the mainstream. And all of this is wonderful, but if you don't use the technology and the applications and the reporting tools, what's the point? The biggest question we hear, one of them, is why bother? The platforms don't care. Twitter doesn't care, Facebook doesn't care, Google doesn't care, nobody cares. They care. If you don't complain, nobody hears your voice. Silence is poison. One complaint is just one complaint, but 1,000, 10,000 complaints starts to build into a storm, into a movement. Things that would go unnoticed and do go unnoticed because they are not reported suddenly become visible to the platforms, become visible to the communities. We have received complaints about things, and when we go to investigate the complaint, we find that there is a video, a post, an account that has been up for a year. And when it is flagged, the response is, well, you know, which is, I mean, when we look at the material, it is clearly in violation of the platform's terms and conditions. And when we report it and say, well, they come back and say, well, this has been here a year. Nobody's complained about it. There was obviously not a problem with it when clearly looking at the content there was a problem. That is because no one bothered. And that is the great trap. There's no way possible that the platforms can detect everything that is going on. It is up to the communities to step up and make the effort. And that is the only way right now that the platforms can be fully aware of what's happening and the gravity of what they're seeing. There are issues, there are things that go up that the platforms, because of cultural or language or social conditions, they can't have any idea of that it is offensive, that it is problematic. It is up to us to explain the parts of the greater world in these situations. But, as I mentioned earlier, not everything rises to the same level. Some things are absolutely should be responded to instantaneously, but it is a matter of, to my mind, up to the user what to report and what not to report, certainly. Jonathan, you have some opinion?
I just wanted to go back to the point you just made too, by the way, the importance, so many of the companies that are social platforms, global social platforms are U.S. companies, and obviously there's an expansion into marketplaces throughout the world, but there may not be the sensitivities and the appreciation for the legal construction of these kind of communications may not always be there. It may not always have expanded as fast as the platform itself has. And we were just talking a little bit earlier about how companies have found responses. I thought maybe you might want to raise that, or at least talk a little bit about, if you wouldn't mind, just how companies were able. You mentioned about how companies in areas, and you mentioned Paris or France or other countries, is coming to grips with requirements that they weren't necessarily aware of become more responsive because, as you mentioned, people raised the issue that a lot of communities came together and highlighted grave concerns.
Well, many years ago, the default position of many companies was that they were US-based, that they were subject to US law, that they were not subject to international laws. And there was quite an outroar across many countries. The first and most notable was in France. And France took issue with Yahoo, that Yahoo was posting material that was illegal in France, and took Yahoo to court because the laws that existed in France had been on the books for many years, were established in French law. It was not something that was enacted to ensnare the internet company. Yahoo initially resisted. It went to court. They lost in court and had to comply with French law as a result of that. Other platforms, looking at what happened in the experience of Yahoo in France, started to change their positions, started to come around to the fact that the local laws were important, that the laws enacted by individual societies around the world were relevant to what was delivered in those countries. As a result of that, we now have situations where material that is illegal in Germany, illegal in France, and in other places is blocked from delivery to IP addresses in those countries. Not so long ago, that was not the case, and now it is a common occurrence. And that is part of the evolution of the internet and of protecting the communities. But when there is stuff that appears, certainly in many of the countries outside the United States and in the United States, there's a real fear of reporting. People look at material, say, well, going back to the personal data, what is going to be exposed about me? How am I going to make myself a target? This is something that Red Button addresses rather directly.
Yeah, during the past 3 years, we try to put the finger why people fear to do something, to report. And in our experience, there is one major reason that people are afraid is the reaction from the other side. They don't want to escalate the situation and to make the situation even worse. We found that the solution is to keep them anonymous. As all the traditional channels also follow, they also keeping the report anonymous, but still users do not aware that their report is not going forward to the other side. So I think the fear is coming from the fear from the reaction from the other side. This is the major reason.
When you put forward a report that is anonymous, how do you contextualize that report? I mean, what happens there that still gives that report some gravity without having the attachment of some identity to it?
Well, actually, we do not need the identity of the reporter. We need to see the incident itself. We need to see what's really happened there. If it's a hate group, if it's a violence page, if it's abusive photo or video. If we got to see the incident, this is what the Red Button tool do. It send us a print screen and the URL, and we're able to see, to review the report and analyze it. And therefore, we're able to see the incident itself and to take actions against it. And it's, as you said before, it's all thanks to strong collaborations we have with all the social networks, such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and so many others. They do care.
Now, there are, even with the best of intentions, even with the best of mechanisms, and I'm sure that everybody here has experienced it, that something has been reported and nothing has happened. It's been re-reported and nothing has happened. Do you want to talk about lack of response by platforms?
Yeah. So I would say it's related to two things. One is the host side, and the second one is the user side. The host side, we can see that the cyberbullying and online harassment is increasing. This is why South by did this important conference. And I think as much as the phenomenon are increasing, as much as it consumes time. And imagine how much effort and time the social networks need to invest on keeping the environment safe. So this is one thing. The other thing about the outside is they not always share the same interest as the user wish to. And like, it's not a secret that the social networks look for engagement, for a comment, for posts, for uploading things. And sometimes it's, there is a conflict between of those two. From the user side, I think users do not have an easy way to report today, to express themselves. And this is another thing of the lack of the response. They cannot well express themselves. And the last thing is that one person as an individual do not have much of influence. This is why I think ADL is important in this area, and the Red Button and many organizations that taking the user, the user report and bring it up as something important, flag it as something that the social networks have to do something against it.
We have also experienced that not every platform is transparent about what their reporting mechanism looks like. Very often, complaints made in the United States end up before reviewers in India, Ireland, Mexico City, any number of other places, and the context of the complaint is not always clear due to cultural or language issues. And this can lead to a result that is not always the best outcome for the complainant, and it goes back to a very old, an old adage: if you don't like the answer, don't accept it. Don't take no for an answer. If you are sure that what you're talking about is indeed a problem, not in necessarily in the most, certainly in the most objective type of way, imminent threat of bodily harm, conspiracy to commit a crime, terrorist activity, in a very real sense. When reporting it and the answer is no, just go back and explain the context and move it forward. Which leads to really the matter of understanding the platform's policies and how the various methods that you can reach out to a platform impacts your ability to respond. You got something on that?
You know, it's kind of ironic a bit here that, especially in the place of the social network platforms, often the best way to rally support for getting something changed in this environment is actually through social networks themselves. I'm not sure if you all are aware of this. Just a couple days ago, in Minneapolis, or just outside Minneapolis, an African-American couple went to a Joe's Crab Shack, sat down for dinner, and looked at the table, which had you know, a lot of old clippings from papers or whatever underneath the table, and they were shocked to find a report about a lynching, right? Which, you know, nobody expects to find when they're sitting down at dinner, and they abruptly got up and left and voiced their concerns on Facebook. And wasn't that much longer after having done so that dramatic responses happened, and the company fixed these things. But it was very powerful in highlighting that. But to go back to your question, sorry, but there are very, it's, you know, Facebook, for one, if we're going to talk about social networks, is one of those that offers you, a user, a lot of different opportunities to influence how your information is shared and restrict the other people who can access it or engage with you. I think we were talking a little bit about photos earlier and how you tag and how you share those. But you can also You can obviously you can unfriend people, and you're all probably familiar with that. But you can go even further, and you can block somebody, right? Unfriending still means that they can see some of the stuff that you post if it's friends of friends, right? Because that's one of the settings that there is on Facebook on how you share. But if you block somebody, you don't have the opportunity to see that information. Now you can always choose whenever you post something on Facebook, you can choose to make it public or just share it with your friends or a broader, or even a targeted, narrower list of people, and that's something to keep in mind when you do choose to share those things. And you also mentioned YouTube a little while ago about how they've taken down a lot of offensive videos. But one of the other elements of YouTube, I'm sure many of you have encountered this, is when you go to read what you think is an innocuous video, there's the commentary below it, which can be harassing and offensive. And that's one of the areas that we've seen them be responsive to in where people who do raise and flag those complaints, you can do so within the comment section. And a lot of those, if you go through older posts where that material's been there, a lot of those have been taken down.
I mean, I think that part of it is that reading the terms of service, reading the how-tos on any platform is no small task. Learning how to use many of these platforms can be incredibly complicated. The internet is not a toaster. There is not one button on it. It is much more complicated. You would not get into a car and put the key in the ignition without having had experience. Well, maybe you would, but it wouldn't be a good idea. And neither is it a good idea to venture into areas of the internet without knowing what it is you're dealing with. This is not a small task. But it is incumbent on the user to have a certain level of knowledge going in. Nothing that starts out simple stays that way for very long. Facebook and Twitter and all of the platforms, YouTube, started off as relatively simple and have evolved into incredibly complicated, albeit useful, tremendously useful mechanisms, which you've grown up with or you're stepping into. And there is a need to understand what you're doing. And there are technical limitations to what's going on. Many times the question is, well, why can't they just not let that stuff up there to start with? Why can't the posts be blocked when they're using the N-word or some sort of other racial epithet or some sort of slur against a group? The technology for that isn't there yet. The prime example of that was when Amazon attempted to unilaterally take the Confederate flag off of their platform in the aftermath of the news and the discussion about the use of the Confederate flag as a hate symbol. When Amazon tried applying a bit of technology to that, they took down books and videos and historic documents and a whole host of things that were not related to the Confederate battle flag in a modern racist context, but a lot of historic material came down. The problem there being, and the example there being, is that there is another layer to so much of what is out there that the context beyond that first layer is really critical to the items that we are experiencing, that we go to the internet for, and we have yet to have software computers readily available with the level of function to discern the way a person would. And that's important to keep in mind when you're going ahead. It isn't to ask YouTube or Facebook or Twitter to filter incoming documents would render those platforms almost useless in the context of what we go there for. It's happened before with others, and it's an ongoing experiment, and we will get it right. Technology is the answer. We are getting better at it. You have anything else you want to add before we go to questions?
Yeah, I want to add something for what Jonathan said before. I think today privacy is no longer exist. and if I need to say something that you should take out from this panel, is that everyone here need to be responsible to what he upload, what he sharing, his comments, because once you upload something to the internet, even if it's your opinion, it's there forever. And this is, I think, each one of us have common sense and could think a few minutes before we do something online, and it might be the big change.
All right. We have a microphone. Anybody have any questions? Anything they've experienced that they'd like to talk about? All right. Well, we thank you very much. It has been a pleasure and an honor, and we look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you for having us.